Hello, James Copley here, joined by Phil Smith, and welcome to the Raw podcast, brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. Phil, how are you doing?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. Sort of mostly enjoying the World Cup in spite of anything, in spite of everything, rather. I thought Cameroon were very unlucky to lose that, but yeah, all good.
Yeah, the Japan v Germany game and the Saudis v the Argentinians was exceptional television, I thought.
It's been a decent tournament in the main, I think, in terms of the quality of the football, because I think what we're seeing is some of the teams we might assume were underdogs seem to be better prepared. Whether that's because they've had more training time or what, I don't know. But Japan were a great example of that. Saudi Arabia obviously were a great example of that. They were excellent. So yeah, it feels like the gap's a bit closer than it sometimes is in a lot of tournaments, which is probably made for better game. I mean, Canada I thought were amazing last night, even though they lost. So yeah, I think it's probably been a slightly better tournament than I expected in terms of the on the pitch stuff, and obviously there's been a lot of very depressing stuff off the pitch as well.
There has. We'll touch on that, but it's interesting, isn't it, that both Argentina and Germany have lost their opening games previously and made it to World Cup finals. So I wouldn't count them out just yet, especially when you've got Messi and the like.
No, definitely not. And I mean, Argentina, they should have won that game on chances created. Fair play to that. It's one of the best World Cup goals ever, isn't it? When he's cut in and stuck it in the far corner. So I definitely wouldn't write them out. I mean, Germany have got a lot more jeopardy, haven't they? Because they've got Spain this weekend. And watching the two games yesterday, unfortunately for Jefferson Burnett, Japan look a lot better than Costa Rica at the moment. So they've got a really good chance to get on to 6 points. So yeah, that group, I thought that group was going to be a good one because I thought Spain were brilliant in the last Euros and unlucky not to beat Italy in the semis. And I thought Japan were brilliant in the last World Cup. If I remember rightly, they ran Belgium really close in the knockouts. So I thought that was going to be a good group. And yeah, I guess I feel a little bit sorry for Burnett because at the moment it looks like he's in a poor team in a very, very high standard group. But hopefully they can improve from yesterday because that was pretty tough viewing. Even though I thought Burnett did all right, he just didn't have any opportunity really to show what he was about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the digital revolution continues over at Sunderland Echo Towers. We are now on TikTok, YouTube, as well as Twitter and Facebook. You can also head over to the sunderlandecho.com for all the latest Sunderland news, and the paper is still available from all good news agents. Phil, Sunderland play a friendly in Dubai tomorrow against Saudi Arabian club, what they're called again? Shabab. This has thrown up a few controversial issues, you would say. So, Saudi Arabia, unelected government, as is Dubai. Both countries have, questionable human rights records. We're seeing that with Middle Eastern countries, and there's been highlighted by Qatar and their treatment of LGBTQ community and migrant workers. We've seen the discourse around Newcastle United, Manchester City, amongst other clubs, but it's not an issue unique to football. Golf has had Middle Eastern investment and ties to the Middle East. The WWE has. Boxing, Anthony Joshua won the unified heavyweight titles out there. Governments, our own government continues to deal with Middle Eastern countries. So it's a complex issue. Some fans care passionately about Sunderland playing this friendly. The Spirit of 73 have come out in opposition, as have the Red and White Army. And I've seen some fans who just don't really see the big deal. It's a very messy and murky world, very topical, Phil. What are your thoughts generally? I know it's a large and heavy topic to start off with, but probably one we should tackle, really.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the main thing it says there is a broad spectrum of opinions. We've seen that. And so nobody should sort of claim to speak for everyone or say that they've got the only right opinion. And I think that's probably how I would start, by saying that I don't profess to speak to anyone or say that I have the right answer. Just like everybody else, I'm someone who loves the game because of what it meant to me as a child and because I still love the sport and the sense of wonder you get from World Cups and stuff. So none of us want to ever be talking about these issues, really, but sometimes I think you kind of have to. And the first thing I would say is I thought it was an odd decision from the club. I think there's been positivity about where the club got to at the World Cup break. I think a lot of people are really looking forward to the second half of the season, the prospect of having some key players back, Ross Stewart, etc. So I don't really understand why you would choose to play a fixture that was going to prove to be very divisive, and why a lot of people don't mind and will watch it tomorrow and don't have a problem with it. I think there are a lot of fans who aren't going to watch it and would rather it wasn't happening. I just think that's a shame, first and foremost, and I think something to reflect on. because I don't really understand why that decision was made. When I was at the Red and White Army Q&A a couple of weeks ago, Christian Speakman did say they were planning a game. We didn't know who the opponent was going to be at that time, but what he did say was that he wanted the team to have a different challenge, something fresh, a different type of opposition, rather than, for example, playing another English club, which I understood actually at the time. And I think also it should be said that I think, the Saudi League's a pretty good standard, and I think it'll be a good standard of game. And there's some good players in that team. But I think, everyone will have their own opinions on whether they want their club to sort of put forward a certain set of values. My personal view is that I would like the club to be very proactive and very clear in standing for diversity and inclusivity. And that includes, human rights very much. And I think choosing this opposition does call that into question. I think that's disappointing. And I think it's a shame that they've done that. What I would say is that, a lot of people would say, this isn't the same as sort of the sports washing operations that we've seen elsewhere in the sport, including the current World Cup, sorry. It's a friendly, Al Shabab are not the Saudi state, and the players and the staff shouldn't be seen in that light. And I think that's absolutely right and absolutely fair. And I think it's important to recognise that as well. But my personal opinion is that I think it's a mistake from the club, and I think it's a little bit disappointing. What I would say is you mentioned the Red and White Army there when you started. And I think what they'll take to the club, or what they've said they'll take to the club, is that there's a lot of concerns among the fan base. And I'm sure they'll reflect as well that a lot of the fans aren't so bothered. So I guess what I hope comes of this is the start of a genuinely meaningful dialogue between supporters and the club about, what the club should stand for and where it should stand on these issues. And so it can there can be pause for thought moving forward, so that when we're in similar situations, maybe more thoughts given to these decisions. Like I say, I think there's a broad spectrum of opinions. We'll be covering the game tomorrow. We think it's important. There'll be some important things come from it for the rest of the season. And I respect that a lot of fans will watch the game and won't have a problem with that. And I can certainly understand why they see it as very different to some of the other issues that we're talking about at the moment. And I think that's right. But like I say, I think it was my personal opinion, just my opinion, is it was a misstep from the club to organise a fixture like this. And I would like them, I want my club to stand for inclusive values. This doesn't mean that they don't, but I do think it's a decision that can only call that into question to an extent, and I think that's disappointing.
No, I completely agree with all of that, and I think I'd rather the friendly wasn't happening, but it is. If I was just a supporter, I don't think I wouldn't buy it or engage with it, but I have a job to do, you have a job to do tomorrow, so we will watch it, we will report on it. I also understand the other side of the argument, in which for millions, football is an escape, it's a distraction from the real world, and a lot of people just want to watch football and to not engage or have to think about these very serious issues, which I actually think is fair play. If that's what you want out of football, and you want distraction and you want to just support your team, I completely get that as well.
Yeah, totally. Totally agree. And I totally agree why, totally understand why some people who don't see it that way, who do want to engage with these issues, might not see tomorrow as necessarily part of that. As I explained before, I can see that. So I totally respect that. I guess, just to stress, my hope from it, as we talked about, is it can be the start of a bit of a dialogue. Because I think, unfortunately, as much as we wish that we didn't have to talk about these issues, it's not going away, and it will come back up again in the future, I'm sure. So can we use this as a starting point maybe for the club hierarchy to learn a bit more about how fans feel about these issues, for the fans to learn what the club actually feel about these issues, and can we then get somewhere from those two starting points? Maybe hopefully there's a bit of an opportunity there.
I think what's important to me when these issues come up is to try our best not to be tribal about it, because sometimes it can feel like Sunderland's coming in for a bit of criticism. You want to defend your club. It's your childhood club. It's your area. It's your people. It's your team. I think it's important to at least acknowledge that there's always a bigger picture, and that migrant workers, the treatment of them, that's a thing. The treatment of LGBTQ communities by some of these Middle Eastern governments isn't very good at all. Treatment of some journalists, unelected governments, all of that sort of stuff. It's about a bit more than football. But as I say, if football is just what you want to do, then that's also fair enough. Obviously, you're not in Dubai, Phil, as you can tell. It's your flat in Ashbrook, but you do have your finger on the pulse regarding the team. I don't think expenses would have been too pleased with a trip all the way out there. But what have Sunderland been up to so far?
Yeah, well, I think it's mostly been an opportunity, I think, for Tony Mowbray to actually get some training ground time, really. If you look at the schedule he's had since he's come in, you're pretty much on that cycle of match prep and then recovery and then match prep and then recovery. So I think it's been a really valuable opportunity for him to actually get to know his players, because it's almost like a mini pre-season. Something that any manager will tell you, or head coach, as we should now call them, because that's what they mostly are, apart from Alex Neil at Stoke, of course. But we won't go into that. They'll tell you, pre-season is as much about having the players with you 24/7, so you can get to know them, so they can bond with each other. So that's been a big part of it, and also some of those actual footballing ideas, because I think he's pretty open that when he came in, he didn't think there was much wrong with the team, so he just almost let it run for a bit. And then obviously the injuries to the strikers, he had to start sort of putting his own stamp on things and changing things. So I think that's been the kind of big theme of the week. And then obviously the other one is trying to get these key players that we're all talking about up to full fitness. And I suppose we'll get a better idea of where everyone's at when we see the squad tomorrow and who's involved. From what I was expecting, which seems to largely tally up with what's been happening in terms of the training sessions, Lyndon Gooch, I think the hope was he would be pretty much ready to go at this point. So I would expect to see him involved tomorrow and certainly be in contention next weekend. Edouard Michou had a fairly minor injury after the Luton game. He looks like he's played a full part in training this week, which we expected. And so I think he could be involved tomorrow as well. And then sort of you're into a category of players who are probably not quite fully involved yet, but are dipping in and out. Ross Stewart and Aji Elise, as far as I'm aware, still have a chance for next Saturday in terms of playing some part. The expectation was that Dan Ballard would be a bit further behind them, but clearly he's making decent progress because we have seen him taking some part in the sessions out there. So that's pretty encouraging stuff, really. We're talking about big players, especially the way Mowbray wants to play. And obviously the little stuff as well, like, kind of gone under the radar because of those injuries. A chance for Ellis Sims to actually get up to full speed. He's clearly, even though he's still made an impact, he's clearly not been anywhere near as sharp as when he came back into the side. So it's almost been like a mini sort of pit stop, if you like, for the season, I think. Chance to get some ideas across and a chance to hopefully get some more depth in the squad.
I imagine it would be nice for a bit of team bonding as well. I think Tony Mowbray mentioned that before they went away, in terms of he's been ushered in at a part of the season. He hasn't really had too much of a chance to get to know any of the players properly. A lot of foreign lads coming in, like Bennett, who's at the World Cup, and Abdullah Bar, Edward Michou. It's a good chance for them all to get to know each other, all of the players and staff. And it's a bit of a cliche, Phil, but the likes of Dan Ballard, Ross Stewart especially, Elise coming back, they're going to be sort of like new signings, aren't they, really? Because they haven't been around that much. Ballard, not since the, I think, second game of the season. He's the one, alongside Stewart, you really look to and think they could have a serious impact on Sunderland season if they do get up to speed and stay injury-free.
Well, it'll definitely feel like new signs to Mowbray, that for sure. I mean, I would put Elise right in that category because I think he was so outstanding in that run of games before he got the injury that, Mowbray will be desperate to get him back in the team on the basis of those performances because he was that good. I was so impressed with him, both on off the ball, his willingness to get forward, to take players on, and then his ability to sort of, do the battling side of it defensively as well. And that's going to be a really interesting one when he's fit, because you then have big dilemmas in the defensive part of the pitch, because Danny Bart, a lot of fans would, I think, fairly put him forward as player of the season so far for his consistency. Dennis Serkin we've seen be outstanding in some individual games. So then, do you go to a back three to sort of facilitate having all those players? Or does someone have to sit out when Ballard's fit as well? It's really exciting. No disrespect to the players who've been in the team in recent weeks because they've done really well and got some good results. When you start talking about Ballard, Bart, Elise, Stewart, and Sims up front, what we're talking about is a very different team that has the ability to mix it up. And these technical players that we've loved watching and doing some brilliant things in recent weeks, Ahmad, Roberts, Pritchard, Dan Neil, all of a sudden they're playing in a team where they still have the license to go and do their thing, but they also get a bit of extra support as well. And it means that maybe we won't be quite so utterly panicked every time someone give away a throw-in, corner or free kick, which for my blood pressure, which is already at dangerously high levels, will be very welcome indeed.
Even obviously he returned before the break, but even having someone like Niall Huggins back, I bet you this has come at a perfect time for him. He's come back into the side. He's played 90 minutes in the first team all of a sudden due to a bit of injury crisis Sunderland experienced. We're going to have that option. A hugely talented and technical player who can fill in at both left back and right back can only be a good thing for Tony Mowbray.
I mean, what he did at Birmingham was incredible. In the first half, with the absolute greatest respect, I thought he looked like someone who hadn't played senior football for over a year, probably shouldn't have been in from the start against such a physical team who's had such an impressive start of the season. And I thought he did well in that context. The second half, I thought he genuinely did well. He seemed to get better, defended really well. Won headers, which he's got no right to do, like zero right to do, but he managed to do it. And then to get through sort of 7, I mean, I felt, pretty horrified when 7 minutes went up on the board, especially because all season we've been whinging about there not being enough injury time. And the one time Sunderland defended a lead, pretty much on their own goal line, suddenly the ref decides to enforce injury time, which has been the best thing about the World Cup, by the way. Slight aside, can we bring that back to the Championship? Because that is fantastic. Yeah, that is going to solve so many problems at once. So please, EFL, it's not the EFL, is it? It's PGM all, isn't it?
It's fantastic when you're it's fantastic when you need to get back into a game, perhaps, but when you're defending a slender lead against a good side, it might not look so attractive.
No, but if we look at the first half of the season, Sunderland's issues have been at home and breaking teams down and coping against that tactic. So I think it was something that would benefit them. But back to Huggins, he did really well, absolutely brilliant. What I would expect is there'll be sort of peaks and troughs for a while, just because it's only natural that his body's going to be adjusting to senior football again. He's going to be adjusting to senior football. I think we'll see him probably dip in and out a little bit, and that's absolutely fine. But you're absolutely right. That would be a massive boost because he can play off both sides very comfortably. He gets stuck in, he dribbles. His player Mowbray actually very nearly signed at Blackburn before he came to Sunderland. Clearly, being someone that Stuart Harvey had been tracking at Blackburn as well. So that tells you that he sees him as a Championship standard player at his best. And then on the other flank, Try Hume was brilliant at Birmingham as well. More so first half than second half, but even in the second half, he made a big goal line clearance, winning headers, getting stuck in.
For a player who's played mostly in Northern Ireland and then League One, it's not bad, is it really?
He's old-fashioned. He's a proper old-fashioned fullback, if you like. He's comfortable getting forward and he'll do it, but he likes winning his headers and he likes getting stuck in and he likes battling against his winger.
It's nice to have a few specialist right and left backs available.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just an area which has been of annoyance to me for a long time. Starting the first game of the season last season against Wigan with Dan Neil left back, who did brilliantly well, by the way, and Carl Winchester, who is a sort of makeshift right back. Makeshift's probably harsh. He's a very good right back in League One. A bit of an annoyance over the years, but we've seen it with countless players really since the Premier League days. So it's nice to actually have some specialist fullbacks at the moment.
Yeah, you're right. It's weird. It's just this like Sunderland DNA thing where it's just like
callback Gardner. I can. We
don't bother with fullbacks. We'll just put a midfielder there. I mean, works for Pep a lot of the time, but
different levels.
Different levels. But anyway, no, I think it is good, and I think there's always a risk. Players always are better when they're out of the team, and there's always a risk that you sort of just go, oh well, if we just drop this player in, suddenly we're just going to start turning everyone over, and it's not going to be like that because there'll be other injuries, and 3 weeks after the season resumes, we'll be talking about other positions where there've been injuries. So I don't see it as like a sudden flick the switch kind of thing. But if we look at some of the issues some of them have had over the 6 weeks, it does feel like we're quite close to being able to go somewhere to correcting them. And then we'll be able to really see what Tony Mowbray is all about. because mostly so far, and I think he's done a pretty decent job of it. He's been trying to haul the team through, hasn't he? It's been about, can we get a result here and get out of there with the issues that we've got? And hopefully we can start seeing him put a bit more of a stamp on it. Like I say, I don't think that means we're suddenly going to start rolling teams over every other game. But I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and it's a nice position to be in. We'll touch on it later on in the podcast, but if you'd offered us this at the beginning of the season, I'm guessing we all would have taken it. We asked for some questions on Facebook, and one came back from the exiled Mackham, who does have his own YouTube channel, so feel free to check that out as well, about our favourite time of the year, the January transfer window, Phil. What is Sunderland's biggest need in the January transfer window? I would probably say back up to Stewart and Sims, and I think when Evans dropped out the side, it was pretty glaring that we don't have a like-for-like replacement in terms of what he can bring.
Yeah, the defensive midfield is actually the main one for me, because I think you're right. I think the importance of Evans is underlined when he's not there. And I think from what we've seen of this season, I think Dan Neil's got the potential to be a really good Championship number 8. I think, although he's not always been brilliant when he's played there, I think he's had his best games there and he's done some really good things for someone stepping up for the first time. I would like not to have to drop him back every now and then and put him in a position where he's clearly not totally comfortable yet. Maybe in a couple of years he will be. But I just think for now that specialist cover would make a huge difference to this side. I know it's a position that Mowbray's already told us that they did try to sign on deadline day. That was one of the positions they were active on. So I suggest, they know that's an issue, and I doubt that's changed. And like you say, I think the striker one for a couple of reasons, actually, because one is the obvious one that we've just played a period with no strikers and had a big impact. So you'd like to see that corrected. But I also just think in terms of the long-term plan, because obviously we do have this situation where my instinct at the moment is that Stewart won't leave in January, but obviously that's something that could change overnight if a Premier League club came with a big bid. But you want to see some evidence of that kind of long-term succession planning to upgrade that department. Sims might not be here next year; he's on loan. Yeah. So you'd like to see that evidence that they're sort of working to fill that important position over a long period of time. Obviously, signing Nathan Broadhead would have been a big part of that, and they did come incredibly close to doing so. But I'd like to see that addressed, because
I wonder if that's something that might come around again. Given I know he signed a new contract at Everton, but his loan deal at Wigan's not going to last forever. They've had some problems recently as well with the sacking of the manager and some dodgy ownership themselves.
So who knows? We'll see how that goes. But I'd like to see that, because one of the big things that you would have to give this hierarchy and sort of structure big credit for was that when Charlie White left, they signed his replacement 6 months earlier, and he had 6 months to find his feet and to get settled and to build a bit of rhythm. And that was really, really good. Really good work.
That's how it should be done, isn't it?
That's how it should work.
That's the gold standard. Obviously, it won't work out like that every time, because not everyone's a Ross Stewart. But that is, that's the litmus test, isn't it?
And to be fair, when I was at that Q&A that I mentioned earlier, and one of the this topic obviously came up, because everyone loves a striker debate in Sunderland. But one of the things that they did mention was that the ideal scenario is that when a player's sold, you already have their replacement in the building. Yeah. And the point was made that Sam Greenwood had scored his first Premier League goal the day before. And one of the issues that we have currently is that a very promising generation of players, by and large, left the club. And these are all players who now you might be looking as one of these successes and someone that you could drop in and out the team. So I do have sympathy with them on that front as well. Wow, this has ended up being a very long-winded answer to a very straightforward question. Defensive midfield and up front, basically. Full-back, maybe, but at the moment I'm not so concerned, because, like I say, I think Hume's improving. Huggins could get there. Elise, I've got no issues with him playing left-back. Haven't seen him do it in previous games. I think he's excellent there. So that's something that could become, with injuries or form. But at the moment, I'm fairly relaxed about it. I'm sure we've got a midfielder we can stick there anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah, spare a thought for me, who said a week before Sam Greenwood scored for Leeds, his first Premier League goal, and Garnacho scored for Manchester United, that Sunderland could realistically sign them in January. I'm guessing that maybe is out the window now. Commentator's curse and all of that. What about outgo?
That's a great sign you've been played too much Football Manager.
It is, isn't it? Well, Sam Greenwood was very good for me on this year's edition. So Anyway, the less said about that, the better. What about outgoings, Phil? I wrote a piece about this on the Sunderland Echo. I chose 4, but there could have been a few more. The 4 I chose Max Thompson. I think if Sunderland sign another striker, I think it would be good for him to go out on loan. I think he needs to play senior football. Obviously, didn't really get near the team when Stewart and Sims were out, which probably tells its own story. Harrison Sonner, who's been a player who's been in and around Sunderland's first team under Lee Johnson in the Papa John's Trophy, actually started pre-season with Alex Neil and played in the Carabao Cup defeat against Sheffield Wednesday. He could probably do with some football as well. And these are the 2 interested ones. I mentioned Jay Matete and Leon Diaku. I really like both of these players. I really like Jay Matete. I think he could do a similar job to Evans. I think he's had some good performances for Sunderland. Doesn't start too many games. Has only featured 7 times this year for Sunderland. I'm thinking if that midfield is strengthened in January, he could be one that goes away to play some football, to come back and reassess. And similar with Diaku, really, we saw him start a couple of games up front. I think Luton and Huddersfield, was it? But with Sims and Stewart coming back, hopefully some reinforcements in January. You wonder where he fits. Clark, Roberts, Pritchard have those attacking midfield spots sort of sewn up. And is he going to get a game at wing back anymore? I'm not sure. And I think with Diaku and Matete, they're both players that really, really need to play.
Yeah, I think I disagree with you slightly on Matete. I don't see him as an Evans alternative at all. I think that takes away some of the best parts of his game. I think he's an 8. I think he wants to turn away from plays. He wants to drive forward. He wants to go on and get in the opposition's face. He wants to press. So I don't see him in the Evans sort of category at all. I think you could maybe put Mishu in that category, but definitely not Matete. At the moment, I don't see Matete going because although he's not getting loads of minutes, he's a really useful alternative for Mowbray. And we've seen that when he's brought him on in games to help see it out because he gets out the pitch.
Watford, he was decent when he came on.
He did it at Huddersfield. He was good as well. He offers something different to what we have currently in midfield. And actually, to be fair to him, he's mostly taken his chance and he's been offered it. So I don't see that at the moment. I agree with you. If someone were to bring in another number 8, and his potential to get minutes is squeezed further, then possibly. But at the moment, I actually think he's got quite an important role in the squad. We just haven't really seen him get enough minutes yet. Diaku, I agree. I think Diaku's got a little bit stuck because wing is probably the strongest position in the squad. I don't think it's really a massive slight on him that he's not getting minutes in that role. I just think the calibre of players there is very strong. Up front, there's more potential for him to get minutes at the moment, but I don't think he's particularly comfortable there, which is no fault of his own. That's one where I don't really understand where he can play up front came from. He did it once against Roma in pre-season and did an okay job of it, but I don't see him as a striker. He's an interesting one, Diaky, because he's got a lot of ability and he has a habit of getting chances in games, having big moments in games. He came on at Watford and had a big chance which he put inches wide of the far post, which would have made it. That was short of the Paul Bennett's equaliser. Luton didn't do brilliantly, but even then he cuts in and cracks one off the post. And he's had quite a few sort of big almost moments. And he does just seem to have this habit of getting goal scoring opportunities or creating something, even if his all round performance maybe isn't at the level you think of some of the other players. Yeah. So he's a bit of a conundrum for me because he's definitely got something. But what I would say is, whereas Matete at the moment, I kind of feel comfortable that his minutes aren't particularly high because I can see his route into the team and I can see where he offers something different and why Mowbray would see that as really valuable. At the moment, I'm struggling to see that with Diaku, really, especially when the 2 strikers are back. So he's definitely someone who I think a loan move in January might be a good option. But I don't think there's room to lose many players in January, to be honest. They operate a thin squad, which I don't have a problem with. It keeps everyone motivated, keeps everyone with a chance to get in the team. But at the moment, I think they need to add 1 or 2. And they certainly need to add 2, I think, before you could start realistically thinking about losing anybody. Aside from the young players who you mentioned. Again, there's a balance because you need to have a competitive under-21 team as well. So yeah, a lot to think about.
Absolutely. Well, as we mentioned earlier, the big story will revolve around Ross Stewart. You actually spoke to him, Phil, which I forgot to mention on the podcast. Obviously, contract and transfer stuff is off the agenda with these types of things heading into a transfer window. But what was the sort of feeling you got from Ross Stewart when you spoke to him?
Yeah, well, it wasn't off the agenda. He didn't want to talk about his contract, but he was pretty open about where he's at in terms of his future and what have you. And I think first and foremost, I think Ross is a player who understands that he's had a brilliant start to life in the second tier, but he hasn't done it over a long enough period of time yet to sort of say that he's cracked it at this level. And so I think his first focus is to get fit and to get back in the team and prove that he is as good as he looked in those first however many games it was, 7 or 8 games that he played. I think he's definitely would like at some point in his career to try and test himself in the Premier League, as all players would. He also has very, very strong ambitions to play more regularly for Scotland and to sort of increase the number of caps he has. I think that's something that gives him a huge amount of pride that he's managed to make himself an international from where he came from in the game, and he wants more of it. So I guess the question is twofold. Can Sunderland get there before he does, if you like? If they don't, then it might become a question. The contract one, I mean, is fairly straightforward to understand, isn't it? They've been in talks for quite a long time and no agreement's been reached. So that tells you there's a difference in expectation and valuation. Could that be breached? I'm not sure at this point. I think Sunderland recognise that he is one of the very best assets. But as of yet, they obviously haven't been able to put an offer forward. The Stewart's representatives thinks reflects his value. Time will tell who's right on that one. It's one of those things, isn't it? Either in 6 months, someone will be proved right. We don't know who that is yet. I would certainly like to see Stewart signed up because I think he's only going to get better. That's just my opinion. Like I say, my personal opinion, this is not from my conversation with Stewart. This is just my own opinion. I think the best thing would be for him to finish the season here, to continue where he's sort of left off before his injury, to prove over the course of a full campaign just how good a player he is at this level, help Sunderland finish the season really strongly. Hopefully then, sign a new deal and stay for the considerable future. But I think that's a more appropriate point for the club as well, if they still haven't reached an agreement at that point, to sort of take stock. So I don't see him leaving in January at this moment, personally. It's just my opinion. But clearly, if Premier League comes in and says we're going to pay this significant amount of money that the club can reinvest and they're going to offer Ross an opportunity to go and play, I would imagine the situation could change very quickly. That's the reality of it. So I genuinely think Stewart's focus, he would definitely, I think, like to be rewarded with a new contract, as we all would. But I do genuinely think his focus for now is on getting fit, because I think he is determined to prove that it wasn't like an 8-9 game thing. That's the player he is at this level. Yeah. One of the top strikers at the level who could kick on again. He wants to prove that is him, I think. So wouldn't say relaxed, because I'm definitely not relaxed about the situation. In fact, I'm unrelaxed about the situation. But yeah, I don't think we're at a critical point just yet. I think most people see that January ideally isn't the right time. But we'll see. I've seen far stranger things happen in football, and I've certainly seen far stranger things happen at Sunderland.
Yes, absolutely. We'll round off the podcast just by having a look back at Sunderland's first season back in the Championship. It's been largely enjoyable for me, Phil. We've played 27 points. Just looking at some of the fixtures, there was the Bristol City win, which was fantastic away from home. We thought we were heading towards a win against QPR, then the goalkeeper scores. We beat Stoke, and then the next game, Alex Neil goes to Stoke before Norwich City. Tony Mowbray comes in, 3-0 win against Rotherham, which was superb. You then had the low of the Middlesbrough game and the Stewart injury, but then the high of the Jack Clarke goal against Reading in the 3-0, the Bennett equaliser against Watford. I could go on, but there's been so many great little moments this season already, and it's been hugely enjoyable, in contrast to League One, where it was a bit of a slog. It wasn't that fun, and the novelty quickly wore off when we weren't very good in it.
Yeah, I think so. I've enjoyed it so far. I think I'm actually doing a piece for the website in the paper later today about how the promoted teams were doing at this stage of the season. I think over the last 8 seasons, I think there's only 3 or 4 teams who have a better points haul than Sunderland do at this stage. So you strip away all the context, and Sunderland are doing decently. You add the context, which is Alex Neil leaving and no strikers for pretty much 2 months, and it starts to look very, very good. There've been some fantastic football played, which is a big thing. We haven't got 27 points by putting 10 men behind the ball, relying on set pieces, digging results out. We've actually imposed ourselves more often than not on games. And I think where Sunderland are on the table now is pretty much where I think they are as a team. You know, you could look at it and say no teams outplayed Sunderland and no teams looked significantly better than them, which is true. But you can also flip that.
Burnley in the second half looked a cut above when they turned it on, but that's the only sort of.
I thought
really.
I thought that was a bit of a one-off. Like if you look at the goals, there's a cross, there's a lad sticks one in. Yeah,
I just thought they looked to me like they turned it up a notch. I know there was a few suspect goals, as you say, but in terms of their intensity and the way they moved the ball, I just thought it went from not very good. Perhaps it was the contrast. Actually, they were so bad in the first half that once they did up it a little bit, I thought they were impressive.
I think they're a good side, but if you look at the stats, it wasn't like Anyway, you totally derailed my point, so thanks for that. But
sorry.
The point I was going to make is, while we haven't seen many, if any, teams outplay Sunderland, you could flip that and say there haven't been many games where Sunderland have dominated. Do you know what I mean? From start to finish. Even the games where they've been really good and impressed the other team have had moments. So I think sort of a mid-table, slightly lower mid-table is about a reflection of where I see this team. Hopefully they can kick on with injured players coming back and then maybe a bit of investment in the January window as well. So I'm pretty optimistic. I think by and large it's been really positive. I think there've been some sticky moments that haven't been particularly enjoyable. I thought the Cardiff game, the mood around it and the mood after it, mainly because the performance was so poor, I would certainly accept that. Didn't feel like the sort of rest of the season, which has been, like you say, mostly quite fun and enjoyable and optimistic. But listen, if you'd said to me at the start of the season, 27 points from 20, I would have snapped your hand off for it. If you then told me what else was going to happen with Alex Neil and what have you, I would have fainted. And then once I'd woke up and recovered, I would definitely have snapped your hand off for 27 points. I'm feeling quite hopeful, really. I think the manager's shown that he's got the capacity to get some really exciting football out of this group of players. I think the players appreciate that he's a manager who will let them express themselves. I'm cautiously optimistic about the second half of the season. I do think there's a chance. I don't know if I would say it was likely, but I think there's a chance someone could push into the top half by the end of the season, and that would be an outstanding first season back in the Championship for me. So, we'll see.
Well, this is the thing about the Championship as well, is currently Sunderland are 4 points off Millwall, who they play first back after the World Cup, or while the World Cup's still going on technically in the playoffs, but they're also 3 points off Hull in relegation. So it's bonkers. You can put a run together and you could be right up there. Conversely, you could not put a run together and be right down there.
Yeah, I think over the course of the season we'll probably see a more natural table develop. So if you look, for example, at Watford, who had a really poor start of the season, I look at them now, Slaven Bilic in charge, still got a very, very good squad of players. An opportunity for him to work with them during this. I think teams like that who've been a bit underwhelming so far, I think over the course of the season we're going to start seeing them really pull away. Conversely, some of the teams who've had an impressive start of the season but might have smaller squads might find it harder and harder when these teams improve. So I think it might get a little bit less of a wild table, I think, as the season goes on. And I do think Sunderland will probably wind up somewhere in the middle. But yeah, I think there is the opportunity for a really enjoyable, hopefully relatively stress-free second half of the season.
Absolutely.
But who knows?
I had a little look at this stage, or around this stage, under Roy Keane Championships season when Sunderland got promoted, and it was a very, very similar points total. Obviously, Sunderland had a pretty shambolic start to that season, but you just never know, do you? But yeah, mid-table mediocrity would be quite nice.
I think the division's changed so much since
it has,
then,
yeah.
Mainly because of the influence of parachute payments. I think it's much harder now for a team to do what Sunderland did, and they probably would have been one of the biggest spenders that year as well, which we should remember as well.
Strengthened heavily in January with the likes of Carlos Edwards
exactly.
and whatnot.
Yeah, I think it's much harder to do that, not just because of the model that Sunderland have gone down now, but actually because there's a financial gulf at the moment to Watford, Norwich, that just didn't exist to the same extent in those days. So I think that's harder to do now. But I definitely think could be a stage this season. I think there will be a point where Sunderland have kept most of their players fit and they've gone on a little run. And we're looking at the table going, I tell you what, we're not actually far off the top 6 here. I think there will be.
You look at the likes of Luton who've come close over recent seasons.
I think there will be a stage this season where we look up and get a little bit giddy and excited. It's whether, is the capacity there at the moment to sustain that? I suspect probably not, but I am really hopeful of some really good afternoons in the second half of the season where we see some good football and some good wins, and we can feel pretty good about, reflecting on how far we've come from League One. Fingers crossed. Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, podcast has gone nearly 40 minutes, Phil, so we've done well. Thank you once again for joining us over at the Raw Podcast. You can head to the website for all of the latest Sunderland news and opinion. We'll also have full coverage of the game tomorrow in Dubai, including Phil's player ratings. Don't forget to subscribe to the Echo, subscribe to the podcast, and if you see us kicking around on TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook, please drop us a follow, like, share, and just basically interact with us because it all helps. Phil, thanks for joining us, and thanks for the listener. This has been the Raw Podcast. Cheers.